What's up everyone, Howie here at Law Records. Today I'm going to show you how I process hard techno kicks from the individual layers all the way to the bus processing. This is a follow-up from my 5 tips for kicks video, but in this video I'm going to dive into the actual processing in more detail. We'll keep it simple and focus on just a few tools. If you'd like these exact kicks and project file, they're available on my Patreon. A big thank you to everyone who's been supporting me over there. Now let's hear a few examples. These kicks are made from my Kick Foundation sample pack, which you can find in the description. And the best kicks are generally made of 2 layers. We'll start with the individual layers and then I'll go to the buses. So first I choose a top kick like this. It contains mostly mids and highs, and it's basically just a cut of a kick using a simpler or sampler just to take the first half of the kick, because you initially just want that snap and that transient from the top kick at the beginning of the kick. You normally want to high pass between 100 and 200 hertz. That's the sweet spot. If you go a bit higher, it can sound a bit thin sometimes, so stick around that region. And that's all I've done for the top layer. The key is to do as little as possible on the individual layers. And the low kick is generally left as it is. I've just got this transient shaper, added some attack and reduced some sustain, and without that you can see it looks like this, and with just makes it so the attack is just a bit louder, the sustain is just level and not kind of pumping upwards. Then when you add the top layer, it should just add that snap in. Without the top, with it. You can hear that snap, it just sits perfectly over the top of that low kick. That's all I've done for the individual layers, but the bus processing is where things can really get taken to the next level. Let's go through what I've done on some of these kicks. So the first kick, I've got a similar thing. Low kick with a transient shaper, probably just adding some attack and then a high pass filter. But what I'm looking to do is then build on that, glue those layers together and add some clipping to just make sure the peaks are under control and everything's working. The general signal chain I'll use on a hard techno kick bus will be some sort of distortion, sometimes into some soft clipping to just bring that loudness up a little bit more, and then a hard clipper on the end. So in this case, I'm using raw with soft shaping on level 1. I'm in serial mode, and on level 2 I've got diode. I'm just going to turn the saturation off first and on. Okay, so it's just bringing in a little bit of distortion, a little bit of harmonics, and then finally I'm using K-clip, which is just a hard clipper, and I always finish with a hard clipper. Some people use limiters, but I generally find limiters can ruin kicks. Limiters and compressors, I keep away from kicks most of the time. So let's see what that's doing. It's actually got a little bit of softening on it as well with this soften knob here. So as you can see here, it's just doing 2 decibels of clipping. That's just going to make sure it can get really loud in your master. It's not a massive change, but those 2 little things really add up. So without this processing, you'll see it's actually peaking. If I go to session view and play this, you can see here it's 2.96 over 0. So we want to get that back under 0. We want to keep that from clipping and distorting badly on the master out. So what I'm going to do is turn this on, all of these steps. And now you're back under 0. But if I turn this off and on, you'll actually hear pretty much the same volume, maybe even a bit more presence and volume from this kick with all this processing. Off. On. Off. So I'll continue to go through the kicks and you'll see a pattern start to emerge. So kick number 2 has got an amp, the Oxford inflator, which is essentially a soft clipper or a wave shaper on 100% mode, and a standard clip. It's just a different type of clipper that I thought sounded good for this one. On hard clipping, no oversampling. So let's go through those layers one by one and see how it changes the kick. So these last 2 really are just for adding fullness and presence. They're not changing the sound massively. The amp changes the sound. The amp's the glue, and it's only on 19%. So if I do 100%, you kind of lose all of the attack and it just becomes a big distorted mess. So 19% is perfect. Now it's got a bit of that grit that you need to cut through on a hard techno mix. Okay, so kick number 3. It's very simple. It just has the Oxford inflator and the standard clip once again. If you don't have the Oxford inflator, you can use the Ableton saturator in soft sine mode, and it's pretty much the same thing. Just use the dry wet to push that in and the drive, or you can use Ableton Raw and just put it into serial or single mode and use the soft shaper and just drive this in. And that's going to do a very similar thing to the Oxford inflator. The Oxford inflator is quite subtle. You can make this a bit heavier, but yeah, Raw and Saturator are good replacements for the Oxford inflator. So kick number 4 is an interesting lesson here because you absolutely don't need a load of processing all the time. So here I've only got a hard clipper. I obviously thought that the 2 layers themselves were giving enough punch, had enough presence, had enough harmonics in them. They didn't need a load of extra stuff. And so all I've done is just shave the top off of this kick. Let's have a look how much this one's clipping. Okay, so that's just clipping 1.3 dB. It's sounding good. It doesn't need a load more stuff. You know, sometimes less is more. Okay, kick number 5 is a little bit more interesting. So got the similar setup before. This is actually not using compression. This is using the soft clipper in Ableton's glue compressor. All I'm doing is driving this kick into the soft clipper there. Obviously, it can be hard clipping, but the soft clipper sounds really good on this glue compressor. The interesting thing about this one is this kilohertz dynamics, and this is a free plugin. I'll just make it a bit bigger. So this kilohertz dynamics is almost an upward compressor, and what it does is it takes everything after the attack, the sustain of the kick, and kind of just raises the level. You can really control how your kick sounds. It's subtle, but it works really well. It just gains a little bit of perceived loudness, and that's what we're going for here. Loud kicks, heavy kicks that poke through the mix. After that more heavy processing, kick number 6 and kicks number 7 are just using a hard clipper, finding great layers and using a hard clipper to just take the edge off those kicks. You can see how easy this is. You can do this yourself. What I really recommend doing is going into your sample library, spending a bit of time finding your absolute best samples, best kick samples, putting them into a specific folder, and then kind of mixing and matching between your best kick samples can create even better kick samples, and that's how better samples are made over time. And obviously, as I've said before, this is the absolute minimum you need. You need that hard clipper just to take the edge off, because you're just going to get loads of clipping on the master. If you're going to try and get masters that are around -6 LUFS, which is very common in these genres, then I would say you always need a hard clipper at the end. A little bit of clipping across the mix also is really good. So to summarize, choose 2 great samples that already work together, high pass the top layer, shape the low layer with a transient designer if it needs it, use saturation and soft clipping to increase density, finish with gentle hard clipping on the kick bus. I'd normally avoid, especially for these genres, compressors and limiters on kicks. You can get kicks with a compressor that kind of cuts into that attack, and you can lose some of the perceived loudness and power of your kick. For this style of music, they usually hurt more than they actually help. Try this workflow yourself. You'll find how powerful and controlled your masters sound at the end. Also, check out my previous video covering 5 essential tips for harder hitting kicks. These 2 run very well together. If you'd like these kicks, they're available on my Patreon. You can also find 50 kicks, 50 rumbles, and 50 kick and rumble loops on my sample pack on my website, and that's in the description. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.